Can I say it really is a great honour to be with you. You know, Al Stewart is very, very good at sort of drawing you in, because he asked me to sort of come and give a bit of an overview in an area where I do feel equipped perhaps to say something. Where is the world going today and what might we expect? But then under the radar he said, can you talk to us about leadership in tough times? And I thought, how do I do that to a bunch of well-educated, deeply committed people who understand conviction and courage and conscience from a biblical perspective? How can I add any value at all? And I thought to myself, well, in a way all I can do is try and relate some of my own experiences on a life's journey that has been about leadership from the heart as somebody who is convicted of Christian truth. I think the first thing I'd say to you is that we are living in tumultuous times, and it's very difficult for anyone in leadership. My father was a World War II serviceman, and I'll touch on a couple of remarks about him later, because we're all shaped by the home we grew up in. But he served in the famous 9th Division in the North African desert, where the Allies were trying to push Rommel and his Afrika Korps out of the desert. And Rommel, you know, one of the greatest generals of all time, frequently referred to the 9th Division and the Australian men as the finest men of empire, and if he only had a few more of them himself, he'd be in a better place. And that gives me great pride and satisfaction as the son of one of those men, and it was a very, very tough experience all round. My father was incredibly badly wounded and given up for dead. The doctors did not expect him to pull through. He did somehow and came back, and I'm the living proof that he came back, I suppose. But he would never talk about that. They didn't. They suffered in silence in many ways, except that he'd wake up screaming right to the end of his life sometimes, reliving the moment when the Panzer found the range of their anti-tank gun, and he jumped up to pull a screaming kid down. The kid would have been 18, Dad was 23. You know, and Dad would yell out in the middle of the night, get down, you fool, you're going to get hit. And they were both hit. And one died and the other nearly died. But the humour was always good from that era. And there was a yarn about two Aussie diggers finally getting some leave, escaping the desert. They're put on a ship. They go back to Plymouth in England. They're given 4 or 5 days off. So relieved just to be alive, they headed inland to find a pub as far as they could from the waterfront in Plymouth. And they got themselves absolutely written off. And they're kicked out at closing time. They're on the street, and Jimmy looks at Billy and says, I think we've got a problem. We're lost. And his mate says, it's all right, we'll ask this fellow walking down the street. Well, he's frightfully upright. He's in uniform. He's got gold braid everywhere, medals all over his chest, and he's a vice admiral in the English fleet. Hey, mate, we're lost. Can you tell us where we are? I say, do you know who I am? And Jimmy looks at Billy and says, no, we're in real trouble. We don't know where we are, and he doesn't know who he is. And that is where our culture has got to, my friends. And you are in the business, and I hope I am in the business, of offering some hope and some light in an age when people are stumbling unbelievably. So what is leadership? I actually think the most workable little template I've ever heard of came from Henry Ford II, the grandson of the car maker. He said leadership is about a vision, what we need to do, how we need to change, what is it we're trying to capture. It's about, secondly, the ability to articulate it to others so they understand what that vision is. And thirdly, you need to have about yourself the qualities that will make others want to move towards that vision and make it a reality. It's not a bad template, but you can use it for good or ill. Adolf Hitler had a vision. He was able to articulate it. And unbelievably to us, he was able to move the best educated, most sophisticated culture the world had seen to that point in time to help him make it an awful reality. And it cost so much it's almost indescribable today in terms of human and resources and so forth. But there's another question. At what level? So the question becomes, are we committed to leadership and service of others or is it about self-aggrandizement and about the exercise of power? Now, we live in a culture where overwhelmingly it's not about principle anymore. It's about power. And all of the old, broadly based Christian concepts that applied to our politics have broken down. There were the noble socialists of old, and I don't say that lightly. You talk to them, and I might have disagreed with their economic philosophies and so forth, but I didn't disagree with their objectives. They wanted to raise the disadvantaged and the marginalised and the poor into, if you might like to say, into a sort of universalism. Make sure they were fully part of the Australian family. That's a great vision. How could you disagree with that? The classic liberals believed, and this is very Christian too, in a thick matrix of community organisations, if you like, that would neither want nor tolerate big, intrusive state rulership. Some of you have mentioned the podcasts I do. Very interesting man called Doug Wilson, who lives in a little country town in America and used to debate Christopher Hitchens. They were great friends. They debated one another all the time. We took a little clip out of something he said in the conversation, and it ran millions. It was just extraordinary. When you take government, when God is no longer over government, government becomes God. And the Liberals have made that mistake and become small L liberals and into libertarianism, licence. And Conservatives, well, there's nothing left much to conserve. So all of that's broken down. So how might we understand leadership in terms of our role? Firstly, it has to be servant leadership. It's an incredible thing, isn't it? That Queen Elizabeth II's funeral apparently attracted 4 billion people, one way or another, tuned in to watch all of that. Why? We knew she was a servant leader. We know now she was motivated by a godly commitment to the service of others. And people pick it up, and that's important. But then you people are the theologians, not me. The Exodus model, the Torah model, if you like, the model out of which particularly American democracy was developed, and it's all coming unravelled now, the idea of covenantal government, let my people go, and we will enter into a covenant, so much more than a contract where you try to minimise your responsibilities to each other. A covenant is about giving generously. Each side will bring something to the table, and we all serve one another. I am responsible for those around me. And the idea of self-governance, if you're then going to go on more broadly to serve at a national level, leadership should apply at every level. So that's my first plea. Let's recognise it needs to be servant-based, and it needs to be about recognising it wherever we're at, we should exercise our responsibilities properly. So what do I say beyond that? I thought it might be useful to try and just give you some snapshots from my own walk for what they're worth. And I might start with what might be called the agony of leadership. Should I move up from that level of responsibility over my life and my family and my community and my commitments to them to the next step? Many of you will have related to that, the boldness of going out to a Marsden Park and taking on ministry. That story will have been repeated here often. Should I accept that next rung up the ladder that they want me to do at Synod, or whatever it is? It's not an easy one. It really isn't. And I think what I'd want to say out of it, from my own experience, is that you shouldn't take that step until you're convinced that it's the right and proper thing to do, but neither should you shirk it. When I was first asked, to my total disbelief, by the retiring federal member to have a go at a federal seat when I was all of 27, and I said, what does that mean? Why are you asking me to do it? He said, well, I think you'd be good. And I said, they wouldn't vote for me. And he said, why not? And I said, well, for a start, I'm a Christian. People don't like Christians. Oh, he said, I'm a Christian too. Still trying to work out whether he knew what a Christian was. And so he said, I won't take no for an answer. So I went to our bishop at the time, Peter Chiswell, and I said, I've had this extraordinary request. And he was saying, he'd been saying to me, you should be thinking about full-time ministry. And the minute I told him what I'd been asked to do, he said, John, you must try it. See whether the door opens. See whether that God is in that. It's not often easy, but neither shirk it nor try and force open a door that isn't meant to open. 3 or 4 years into my life as a very young MP, with 2 kids and a third on the way, the third arrived at midday. on March the 13th, 1993. You all remember that day. That was the Keating versus Hewson GST election. Do you remember that one? My third child, second daughter, decided to arrive right smack bang in the middle of election day. The local paper ran a picture next week of little Georgie and Julia and me, front page. Block headlines. Nat's wife goes to Labor on election day. And my wife was a real trooper, you know, at 5 o'clock, just in time, she walked over the street from the hospital local high school to cast a vote. I still don't know whether it was for me or not. On the next day, when it was obvious we'd lost the unlosable election, it was an extraordinary time. I have to tell you, I'd gone into the branch of the NAB in Wellington after the town of Wellington in central New South Wales. It was in the electorate of Guida. And we'd launched off the back of a truck. We thought we'd try and get a rabble-rousing crowd going in the main street in the old-fashioned way. It was a complete failure. About 3 dogs and a couple of their owners wandered past while I'm doing my bit with a microphone with some hay bales on the back of a truck. Anyway, I needed to cash a cheque. It was Friday afternoon, about a week out from the election. I went in, old-fashioned bank building. There's a counter, lots of lovely wood. Very nice young lady behind the counter. And in those days, you know, you presented a cheque, no ATMs. She said, "I'll have to have it cleared in the usual way, sir. I'll be back in a moment." She went down the back and spoke to somebody else. "Can I cash this cheque?" He must have said, while they were conversing, something or other about there's an election coming up. And she, with a voice that really carried, she said, "Oh, yeah, there's an election. It's the first time I've voted, but I'm not going to vote because my dad says they're all terrible, and if you vote for them, you just encourage them. And I wouldn't trust any of them." She came back down again. She looked around. By this time, there's quite a crowd, and they've all heard this, doing their banking on a Friday afternoon. She said, "Sir, I can cash your cheque for you. I've had approval." And I said, "Well, thank you very much. And by the way, can I just say to you, I'm sure not all banks are the same, and I just want to say to you, not all politicians are the same." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you've just given a pretty rich description of what you think of politics and politicians. And my name's John Anderson. I'm the candidate for Guida, and I'd love your vote next Saturday." Well, she coughed and she spluttered and she went red and then purple and then puce, realising she'd dropped herself in it, and spluttered, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean the little ones like you. I meant the big ones like Paul Keating and John Hewson." Anyway, we lost the election, and on the Sunday, the then leader of the National Party said he was going to resign because his time had gone and he realised he would never be a senior cabinet minister again. He'd see his time out on the backbench, clear the way for somebody else to come in. Tim Fisher rang me, he was a leader, and he said, "John, you better throw your hat in the ring. There's no way at your age and lack of experience you'll actually win the deputy leadership, but you need to show your interest." And Julia said I was like a cat on a hot tin roof, and all she's doing is saying, "Have a look at your baby, darling." And I'm wandering around saying, "Should I do this or should I not do this?" And I became convinced I should try that door again. It just felt like it was maybe God's next move on the chessboard. So I decided I rang every member of the party, just said I'm running, no clever deals, I just said I'm going to run, happy to answer questions. On the night before it happened, a senior senator came up to me and he said, "I don't know how you've done this, but you're going to walk out the deputy leader tomorrow." And I broke into a sweat. And I went in the next day. It was an exhaustive ballot, and there were 8 people who wanted the job. Probably every one of them better qualified than me, but all had built up enemies over the years. Anyway, we were in an ante-room waiting to be called in, to give a speech and then take questions, and they rule one out and then the next and then the next until there's only one left. Furiously praying, "Lord, take this cup. Nevertheless, your will be done." Because I'd learnt by then how dangerous and frightening power is. And of course, the position automatically brought with it responsibility for agriculture. And in the Labor Party, if you want a nightmare job, you're the Minister for Industrial Relations and the unions, because the very people you love most hate you. And on my side of politics, farmers love to hate the Minister for their area. I didn't want that job, and I'd really seen enough of power. But I felt I needed to see whether the door opened, and it did. And so immediately I had to flick the switch to, "Lord, help me through this. and I made a lot of mistakes, but God saw me through, and I looked back and I realised how he was with me. While ever I remained faithful, as soon as I took my eyes off him, it'd start to go wrong. So that's the agony of leadership. Should I not? And my general advice would be always try the door and give that opportunity to God. But trust what others are saying, because a lot of young people come to me and say, I'm interested in politics, and I usually say, forget it. And if they've convinced me at all they've got anything going for them, I'll say, what do your friends, what do clever people around you say? Would they support you or would they not? And I think that's probably relevant for you as you consider some of those difficult decisions as they come along. Then there are the leadership moments that are agonising but in private. Many of you will have or are or will have these moments in the future. And for me it came in 1998. We'd been elected in 1996, 1998, all the gloss had gone off the government, and I was in deep trouble with farmers because we were trying to reform everything. There was a massive wool stockpile. Do you remember those days, Roger? They'd set up a reserve price scheme that had turned into a disaster, and we had a mountain of unsold wool, and it was overhanging the market. It was all a mess, horrendous drought. The government was generally unpopular. We discovered, to our amazement, that we were having a fifth when we'd finished our family. We always wanted 4, and we were delighted with 4. But we were told during the pregnancy that he would be born with massive difficulties. And they were massive. And he was born, ironically, on his older brother's birthday, 31st of January 1998. And he lived for 6 months, but the complications were so massive that he died. And this private agony was happening whilst I couldn't say anything publicly. And every day I'm thinking, do I need to give all this up, to go with and support Julia? But how do I walk away from these immense challenges? The government's in trouble. Quite a considerable amount of it is because people don't like what I'm doing. I don't want to be a coward and walk away from it. But hey, Lord, it'd be lovely to escape it. And you go through these agonies all the time. And again, I remember one Sunday afternoon when it all just seemed so grim that all that was left was the reassurance that Jesus will calm the storm, and say at the same time, "O ye of little faith, did you not realise I could see you and would see you through?" But sometimes you've just got to capture it here, forget about looking for the feelings, and soldier on. And he came home. We were eventually confronted with the dilemma. I asked for a meeting with the 3 specialists looking after him. We asked them, did they see a happy 5-year-old running around because he'd been through operation after operation after operation? 2 said, no, we don't. And 1 said, yes, I do. That was an awful moment, a terrible moment. And all of this is happening while in the public arena your name's dirt and you're in all the trouble in the world. And some of you will be in that experience from time to time where your church and even your local community are after you. And you've got this terrible thing going on at home and in your immediate family, and how does it resolve? And Julia looked at me to speak, and I thought about it for a long time, and I said, we will take him home and let God take the result forward. And he died 2 weeks later. And I told the PM I wouldn't be running again, I'd have to resign, because some of you know how difficult it is with a kid who we'd been told would require 24-hour nursing, and he'd probably live to be 35 or 40, no more. And I had to turn around again under God. It seemed right to bury all of that. There was only one newspaper story. It was so kind. It helped me through. I don't know who it was. It was a journalist I'd never heard of. It was in a major paper. And they'd got an amazing amount of the detail. They must have gone to a doctor or something. And said all the while this guy's battling these things publicly, he and his wife have been dealing with this. That was so encouraging. When someone understands and draws alongside. So if you see that opportunity, that need for somebody else, don't shirk it, will you? It can make all the difference in somebody's ability to carry on. Then there are the times that are so public that there's no avoiding it. The Sunday before 9/11, I got an early morning phone call from Auckland, from the chairman and the CEO of Air New Zealand, which was a government-owned, recently privatised, airline. it happened to own Qantas. And, sorry, not Qantas. I've got Qantas on the brain. Has anybody else got Qantas on the brain? Ansett. And they said, Ansett's broke. We can't fly it anymore. I said, what do you mean it's broke? We're grounding all the planes. We can't afford the fuel to fly any of them. I said, we've got passengers all over the world and all over Australia. Can't afford to do it. So I'd flown to Sydney, and then straight to Canberra, and we worked right through the Sunday night, right through the Monday night. More exhausted than I've ever been. I fell into bed on the Tuesday night, and an hour into the sleep, the mobile phone started ringing its head off. It's my press secretary screaming at me, get your television on, get your television on. The remotes were flat. So I'm trying to find through the fog, and it's 9/11. And the Prime Minister is a mile from where the plane's gone into the Pentagon. We don't know where he is. We don't know whether he's all right. And the horror of the situation hits me. As the authorities we have, I was never prouder of them, I've got to say, of the people in this country who head up defence, signals, security, the Australian Federal Police. They are fantastic. Most of them, they were in those days anyway. And everything tripped into place in as much as we had arrangement for an emergency like that. DSD was able to patch me through to the Prime Minister, who was in the basement by then of the Australian Embassy. It was a 7-digit number. I've never had such a clear phone line in all my life, I've got to say. It's extraordinary with the technology the spooks have. But I remember thinking, hey, this is pretty big, Lord. No, I can't be the captain of a Greek ship and run to the edge of the bridge and swim away, can I? And I got on my hands and knees, actually prostrate on the floor. And it was one of those moments I said, Lord, this is bigger than me, and I may get crushed out of this, but more than ever I need to recognise I've just got to put all self-interest aside. Please look after my family and make sure that no one dies, because we all assumed this was the first of a series of intended rolling attacks, because I missed something, because there's all these competent people telling me all sorts of advice. They already knew who'd done it. It was incredibly how quickly that happened. We had to get the PM back. Airspace was closed. It was, Lord, just help me to do my job by you and by the Australian people. There's a sense of calm that people who have been in battle can tell you about that can descend in that moment. But I would say the Spirit of God, when it gets to that point, when you realise that there is no way human wisdom and human effort can necessarily guarantee an outcome, you've got to be prepared to totally humble yourself before God. And my political advisor, who's remained a friend, she said to me, in the 7 years, she still says it, the 7 years I worked for you, you're at your calmest in the greatest crisis. And I say, well, how about you look to the master behind that? She still hasn't, by the way, at least not that she's admitted to me. Some practical hints for what they are worth. Again, I feel bad talking about this because you are all highly educated, highly motivated, skilled people. But sometimes just sharing experiences, and I'll just make a few observations here, can be helpful. At least I hope so. It probably goes without saying, but it is true, and you've got to keep it in your mind, and I need to keep it in your mind, that to the extent that you let Christ in your heart crowd out everything else, and in your mind for that matter, you'll be able to cope with these difficulties. So you've got to keep, and I feel like an absolute hypocrite here, you know, your study of the scriptures and your prayer life healthy and intact. The second thing I would say for me, I could never have done it without Julia. I did marry up. Equipped by God, I have to say. Her father was in the Navy. She was used to a situation where the home fires had to be kept burning for quite long periods of time, sometimes by mum. And she knew all of the important things to do. So if I had to miss something, it would be, Dad would be so proud if he could be here tonight. He would have been here, but he's trying to make a better Australia for you. The sort of positive messages which we can so easily overlook as spouses. Oh, your dad should have been here tonight, but he's off at some party. There's a world of difference, isn't there? She knew all those things. But more than that, as a godly woman, she knew that love and respect were terribly important to keep our marriage fresh. And she would always say to me, I can respect you and be your best friend, provided I know you love me. And that was very powerful and still is for us. And I don't know where you are on that one, but all I would say is keep it fresh. Make sure that you really are true partners under God and you're recognising the blessing that being one really is. I think the next thing that I would say, particularly to the men, and I know that women will not take offence at this, I know that because Philip Jensen told me they wouldn't. Hey, are you up there, Philip? I once organised a dinner for Christians in the state parliament. There actually were a few in those days. And one of the really interesting things he said was, to the men, he said, in a lifetime of ministry, the two things women have said to me most often is, I wish my husband had taken more spiritual leadership in the home. Ouch. And I wish my husband had more friends. I think you ladies know how important it is. You're not threatened by your husband, your man, having good, deep, rich relationships with other men. Why do I mention it? I just think accountability is so important. And I think close fellowship and a prayer partner can make an incredible difference. Right through my most difficult years in life, I had a prayer partner. There were three. The first few years was a great, burly, deeply godly man from Queensland. The middle one was Rick Lewis. He won't mind me saying that. Many of you know Rick. And Rick was our minister down at Waniassa in Canberra, and every Tuesday morning he'd knock on the door at 6 o'clock, and he's a big bloke with a big voice, and he'd walk into the hall, into the kitchen, and he'd be saying, now mate, my first question, you know what it is, are you loving your wife? And if I gave a glib answer, he'd pull me up by the scruff of the neck. He said, I said, are you loving your wife? I mean it, it's important. And as he walked out, he'd say, now when you go back up into that place on the hill, just remember who you're really playing to. You've got an audience of one. And then in my latter years, I had a former SAS officer, and he, when Rick left Canberra, came up to this area, actually Engadine, and we've remained great friends ever since. I had another prayer partner. That was very important. And a final comment, Sundays. Now, hard for you people, I guess, because many of you are involved in ministry on Sundays. But the idea of the Sabbath, made for man, not the other way around, it was incredibly important for me, and it became a sheet anchor for me and my wife and my children. Sundays, they knew they took precedence over work. And it had to be the most extraordinary upheaval to alter that balance. And the kids, it became such a sheet anchor for them really early on. Now, I just want to round out what I've said by commenting a little bit on the zeitgeist, if you like, the spirit of the age. We're all confronted by it. We're all dismayed by it. We see this unbelievable individualistic secularism that shows no signs of retreating. It's still advancing. The idea that I feel, therefore I am, I own my body, I am my own property, I will do with it absolutely as I like, I won't have any of these notions of a God telling me that he created man and woman. It's as basic a level as that. And that's the age that our children are caught up in, and many of the people that you're ministering to. All of us are products of the age that we've grown up in. I grew up with a father who had seen the horrors of war, who lost his wife and then his daughter in a terrible accident, but soldiered on despite it all. There was an incredible sort of resilience of that age and an enormous courage in leadership. I often think of the story of Dwight Eisenhower. He was known to most of us, I suppose, as a president of the United States, but he was the commander in charge of the D-Day operations, and he knew about the loneliness of leadership and the need at times to carry on regardless. Many of you will know the story that D-Day was planned for a certain day in 1945. Storms blew up. They had to suspend it. I've often thought, what would it have been like for the troops? You psych yourself up for the idea that you're going to run up a beach and face a barrage of bullets, and then suddenly you're let down, you're told it's off. Imagine what that must have been like. But for Eisenhower, what a sweat. When do I reschedule it? And the meteorologists of the day, and I'm so absolutely stunned when you read the history of how sophisticated they were, said we're 75% there's going to be a break in the weather in 3 days' time, I think it was. Some of you might learn more than me. Eisenhower had to make the decision to press the button for go, knowing that it was not an absolute. What a horrendous moment. Because having once made the decision, he must have been churning with self-doubt and worry. And he wrote out a letter accepting full responsibility to be issued if it went wrong, but he had to convey complete confidence. He had to convey the impression to everyone, including Churchill, who he didn't like. They didn't get on. He recorded in his diary one night, "I've not been able to get out of it this weekend. I've got to go down to Chartwell. We'll have to suffer the Prime Minister slurping his soup and talking into all hours of the night, and we'll have to get up at 6 o'clock and he won't get out of bed till 11 o'clock. But of course he recognised that Churchill was critically important. Oh, for the wit of a Churchill. Somebody recently gave me a book of the things he said and the things he didn't, and to my great disappointment, a couple of my favourite yarns he didn't say. But one I hadn't heard was that he was an amateur bricklayer as well as painter. They were his outlets. We should all have outlets. That's important too. Our God is creative. We should be as well. He loved building brick walls. And he had a bodyguard for 10 years called Thompson. Big, strong man, only one. These days, even the Prime Minister of Australia has several, but in those days, one. And he, puffing away at building his bricks, he said to Thompson, "I'll have to go in now for lunch." So he left. He said, "Guard the fort, will you, and I'll be back after lunch." He arrived about 3 hours later, having had a couple of scotches, puffing on his cigar. He leant back. And what he didn't know was that Thompson had looked at the wall as soon as he was out of sight and said, "This thing's going to fall over." So he quickly pulled all the bricks out, mixed up a bit of fresh mortar, and did it properly. See, straight as a die. Churchill comes out, leans back, puffs on his cigar. "Look at that, Thompson. There's no finer wall in the whole of Great Britain." One thing he did say, he gave the shortest address ever at a school speech day. It was 9 words: never give up, never give up, never give up. So I want to say to you that, to particularly the younger ones, you've grown up in a different environment and we do soak up the culture around us. Jonathan Haidt has summed up in a way why young people are having such difficulty displaying not just resilience, but what he would call anti-fragility. And he says 3 things. The first is we've fallen into the fatal mistake, well-meaning, of snow ploughing for our children. We don't think suffering's natural and normal anymore, and so we teach them that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. And he demonstrates, he drops a plastic cup on the floor, he picks it up, it's regained its shape, and he says, "That's resilience. It hasn't lost its shape, but you need more. The cup actually should have grown scar tissue and strength through that." See what he's driving at? We don't teach our young people that, and it's very hard for us not to absorb the idea, "It's all got too tough, I'll just give up." The second thing he does, we teach our children, this is fatal, but it's critical to understand identity politics and the atomisation in our society. We were taught that all of us were a mixture of good and bad. The dividing line is not between, one human and another. It's across every human heart. Our kids are taught life is a battle between good people and bad people. No longer will we say, "I may disagree with you, I'll defend to the right, that nonetheless, to the death your right to say it." We say, "If you dare to disagree with me, you are a bad person and I'll do everything I can to cancel you." And it's disastrous. And the third thing we do, which is also a horrendous mistake and which we must avoid, is that we teach our kids to always trust their feeling. "Hey, Mum, it's a hot day. I'm going to dive into this river." "No, there's a sign up there saying there's crocodiles." "No, I'll feel better when I've had a swim." It's fatal. And we're turning our society away from a democracy into an emocracy. It's all a vibe. And it's fatal when we don't think. So faith and reason belong together. Thank you very much for letting me say a few words. I hope that's at least triggered some useful thinking. And please don't hesitate if you think I've got something wrong or I've upset you in any way, because that's not been my objective. I've just wanted to seek to encourage you in the very, very noble task that you are engaged in what are unquestionably very difficult and uncertain times. Thanks.